Okay. You should get a little thing that'll come up that says we're recording. So you just have to accept that, and we're gonna fire away. So thanks so much, everybody, for joining me. This is something, a subject area that I am super, super passionate about. So I truly can't wait to share it with you. I'm also really excited to be getting towards the end of my professional instructor's diploma program, which will allow me to hopefully be involved in educating the next kind of generation of counselors if I'm lucky. So, so I'm super excited to be here. I'm super excited to be nearing the end of my PIDP, and of all the things I think I've learned over 20 plus years in child and youth mental health, this particular tool, emotion coaching, and just communication strategies in general, some of my favorite stuff by far. It's the things that offer the greatest degree of change, and it's so fast. So it's something I get really, really excited about. So I'm going to try my best to keep us to an hour and see how we do. But I've recruited my good friend Michelle to help me kind of monitor the chat and any questions or anything like that comes up. So if I happen to miss you, if you put your hand up and I don't see it, there are going to be some breaks along the way that are kind of natural spots for me to stop and check in. And then and we'll get there. And I really appreciate, by the way, some people that got back to me with what they're hoping to get out of our time together today. So what the overwhelming was kind of like general tools, like what can I do, what can I learn? And there were a few people that said, like, how do I moderate my own anger or my own emotions when I'm trying to communicate with somebody that I love or care about, or I'm trying to impact some change with? So that's a really, really good question. We're definitely going to spend a bit of time there. If you're not checking in with yourself, it's pretty hard to check in with others. So so we'll definitely get to that too. But let's start firing away, because my greatest pitfall is talking too much. So I'm going to try to keep us within a good amount of time. Okay, so my agenda for today, oh, there's somebody else joining us here. My agenda for today, we're going to go through a little bit introductions. I've got some disclaimers and acknowledgements to cover. My objectives for our time together, we're going to spend a couple minutes just talking about kids today. If you don't have your stuff muted, if you could mute it, that would be amazing. I didn't automatically mute everybody, and just if there's any feedback in the background, it makes it hard for other people. So we'll get into the kids today stuff, and I'm going to be there briefly. We'll talk a little bit about emotions and communication, even though that's what we're here for. Those concepts sound super simple, but if we're not all talking about the same stuff, then we might as well be on the moon. So we're just going to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're actually talking about. We're going to spend the bulk of our time on emotion coaching, and then we'll look at the barriers to what gets in the way of communicating effectively with people. So, and then I'm hoping to have a little bit of time at the end for questions and feedback. I'm going to have some polls along the way that I'm going to throw out to you guys, just to kind of get a bit of a sense of if this information is sticking and if it's working. So let's get into it. As far as introductions go, I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm not going to take because we only really have about an hour together. So I'm not going to take the time to have all of you introduce each other. I know I've got some amazing friends from Pemberton. I've got some great friends from here in Qualicum Beach. And I've even got a cousin from Ontario joining us. So super happy for all of that and the support. I thought I might have to bribe people to come. So I'm really happy that you're here on your own free will. So my name's Siri Curlis. There's a few of you actually that I don't know that I think just go this through. So a couple things about me. Leah, can you put yourself on mute?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, I was on mute.
I can mute you actually. There you go. That should work. Oh, now she's talking and I can't hear her. I can't hear you now because I just muted you, but I'll come back to you. Okay, so 20 plus years working in the field of child and youth mental health. Such a blessing to be in this career. I've been loving it. I learn all the time, still learning. So, so excited, not planning to go anywhere. I'm a registered clinical counselor. I'm completing my professional instructor's diploma program, as I said, which is the purpose of this workshop today, because it's part of what's required for that completion. Although I have done this kind of stuff before, this is the first time I've actually recorded it. I belong to a family of 4. I'm a mom of Hope and Nemaya. You can see their picture on the front here. It's funny, Rob, my partner, took a look at that and he said, I don't think you should put that on there with them drinking. They are 13 and 14. And yes, they are having a small little wee bit of champagne at my cousin's birthday. And I decided not to take that off there because part of what we're going to be encouraging today is flexibility. So sometimes we bend the rules a little bit. So in terms of my personal preferences and who I am, I'm the lover of, like probably most of you, food, fun. I love to fish. I love my family. I thought it was kind of fun to include a picture of a lingcod that we caught this summer, and then actually making seafood chowder at Nancy and Rick's cabin over on Thormanby. So that exact same lingcod that you see in the picture with the blue jacket is the same one we're about to eat in the other picture, which I thought was kind of fun. Okay, so in terms of introductions, I want to take just a second to do a quick poll. You might see me look down a couple times at my notes. I just want to make sure I don't forget anything. I've got a 2-question poll for you. I just want to get a bit of a sense of where people are at in terms of their understanding around communication styles, if they've done their own training, and where your comfort level is at it. So if you could take a second just to answer each of these 2 questions for me. It should only take us about 30 or so seconds. So have you ever participated in training? Yes, I've learned tons. No, I've learned none. Where are you at with that? And how confident do you feel with what you've done so far, or what you've learned? I'll just give that a couple of minutes. All right. Okay, we've got a pretty good spread actually. So I'm gonna end the poll there, and I can just share the results with you so you can see what kind of company you're in. So we're like, 40% never done anything like this before. About half of you have done some. One of you have done a bunch. I know we have a couple teachers in the crowd. I'm going to guess that those are the ones that maybe have done a bunch. And then in terms of your confidence level, we've got nobody at 0. That's awesome. And we also have nobody at very. That's pretty typical, actually. That's like, that kind of mid-range. So this is exactly where I would hope you would be for something like this. So that's awesome. Okay, thanks very much for that. I think I made it so that you could all see those results, but all right. All right, I think I got it. Okay. So firing along, a couple disclaimers and acknowledgements. So as some or many of you might know, I am also, in addition to working on doing some schooling myself, I also am employed by the province of BC as a child and youth mental health clinician. I am not representing the public service today. So it's a really important distinction there. This is on my own time and equipment, not on theirs, although there's certainly lots of overlap in some of the materials I'll be covering, but I'm not here on their behalf today. Emotion coaching is a term that's actually coined through emotion-focused family therapy. Dr. Adele LaFrance is one of the co-founders of this therapy, and I was lucky enough to take some training with her and one of her co-workers, Natasha Files. They're just like, I'm super blessed to be able to have done that with the originators. They have a website called Mental Health Foundations, and I'm going to refer you back to it towards the end of our time together today because it is phenomenal. Natasha actually does a 4-part caregiver workshop series, and part of that includes emotion coaching, where there's a lot more detail. So I have very few original ideas. So I'll just share that right off the bat. Most of this stuff is going to be things that I have learned along the way because I paid attention to people smarter than me. So that's, and if I'm really lucky, I get to share it with somebody else, and you can hopefully pass it on as well. So I don't take credit for very many original ideas through this. And really, if we're truly honest, most of what therapy and theory is a compilation of stuff that's been done before that we play with and try to repackage. So I won't claim that any of these ideas are mine alone. And I'm super grateful for what I've learned from the people who've gone before me. In terms of private for-profit endeavors, I do have a private practice. I do it part-time on the side. This is not to feed that. This is just strictly something for my own learning and hopefully for your learning as well. And then in terms of acknowledgements, I just want to make sure that I gratefully and respectfully acknowledge that I work and play on grounds that span across the traditional territories of 198 First Nations communities and 38 Métis chartered communities in BC. Specifically tonight, I'm coming to you from Qualicum First Nations. And I've been working on this acknowledgement thing for quite a while when that felt, because I've been kind of all over the place, and I really love that one. In terms of confidentiality, we have taken your last names off for the recording, so there's no specific identifiers, but I am pretty limited on what I can do to assure your confidentiality in a setting like this. So it's something to keep in mind. Let's try to make it a safe space for everybody. This is not a place for judging or casting shadows or anything like that. I hope it's a place that we can all share ideas, ask questions without feeling worried about what other people will think, and encourage each other. This stuff isn't easy. So, but in terms of confidentiality, this isn't a space that I can obviously guarantee that. And as you know, we are recording. Okay, so in terms of objectives, what I'd like to see come out of this. We've got a few, but the main ones, what I find most important is that if you can take away just like one nugget, something that you grab from this that's meaningful or powerful for you, just one thing, I will feel super happy about that. And it's amazing what 1 degree change can create. So if you look at this little picture here, you see, a 1 degree shift that when it first started looked so small, and where it takes you in terms of your trajectory can be a completely different place. The analogy that I often use when I do training for the ministry is I said, if I'm in Vancouver and I'm in an airplane heading for Hawaii and that plane takes off, if it's off by just 1 degree, you can't really tell when you leave the airport, but I might miss the entire island of Hawaii by the time we get there, right? So you just don't know where these shifts can take you. And sometimes it doesn't look like much and it can take you to a whole new place. So, so don't sweat it if it doesn't feel as big as you're hoping it might feel when you start to try some of these things. I'm hoping that you are going to be able to identify the 3 primary steps of emotion coaching by the time we're done, that you're going to have the ability to reflect on what your own barriers are for effective communication, because we all have them and they're unique to us individually, that you're going to have 1 takeaway and 1, we call it a muddy point, or one thing that didn't sit well, or you didn't quite figure out, or you wish we had more time for. At the end of our time today, I'm going to ask you for what's your 1 nugget of takeaway and what's the 1 thing that seems still a bit confusing. So keep that in mind as we're kind of going through our time together, and see if you can get like, yeah, that's the 1 thing I wanted, because I'm going to ask you to put it in the chat at the end of our time. Ideally, I'd love to have some time for practicing emotion coaching and doing a little bit of troubleshooting. We'll see how we do with our timing on that, but that in a perfect world, the actual skill of emotion coaching, if you do it with the gurus who created it through emotion focused family therapy, is either 1 long or 2 very short days. It's a lot. It's way more than we would normally do in an hour. So we'll see how we do in terms of timing, but that's, I'm going to do my best to do it justice in the time that we have. And the other thing I'm hoping that we can do is like build a little bit of a willingness that you might try to incorporate some of this stuff into your own lives, and that it doesn't feel quite so scary that you don't want to try it. So let's see how you feel at the end of our time together, and we'll circle back to some of this. Okay, let's talk about kids today. This is one of my favorite subjects, and I'm going to do it quickly because this is an entire other workshop. If we had time, I would spend a bunch on it, but I love this stuff, and I really think it's important for us to check in. Where are we at right now? How are we actually doing, and how are our kids doing? And this is going to, especially if you have a phone, you won't be able to see these very well, and that doesn't matter. I just want you to pay attention to the direction of these graphs. This is very cool. So we're looking at kids between the ages of 12 and 24, and over a time span starting in 1991 up to 2017. I wish I had more recent stats, but I don't have them yet. This first chart, if you can see my little cursor here, is looking at kids that have ever been in a physical fight. And this one is kids that have carried a weapon. So on their self-reports, you can see in terms of general direction, we're looking at kids are fighting less and carrying weapons less. The orange one is boys and the blue one is girls. So on the carrying the weapon one, girls are down a bit, but they've kind of crept back up a bit in more recent years. This top one up here is related to sex. ever had sex. And on the other side here is having sex before they turn 13. So again, we're seeing a pretty comfortable gradual decline. One of my favorites, ever used alcohol, which is in blue, marijuana in yellow, or cigarettes in green. With the most drastic decline actually in cigarettes. And again, I'd be curious to see where things sit now with the new world of vaping and with cannabis being legalized. But you can see, at least up until 2017, a pretty steady decline, which is, I think that's pretty amazing. So give yourselves a pat on the back, by the way, parents. Like, this is pretty cool. Like, we are seeing our kids are doing okay. And I think that's partly because we're doing okay. So sometimes I think, we often hear people say like, oh, it used to be like this and it's kids today and it's so much worse, but it actually isn't. So it's important to keep that in mind, I think. This is a little bit more concerning. Suicide rates in Canada by age. The light pink is your 10 to 14-year-olds. The medium pink is your 15 to 19-year-olds, and 20 to 24 is the dark pink. And again, what's concerning for me on this one is the direction of the graph. So just something, again, I want to keep it in mind. And when I compare those charts that we just looked at with the general decline, kids are behaving better, trying substances less, refraining from having sex, not fighting as much. So why is suicide on the increase over time? And this takes us this is from 2000 to 2016. So I think if I'm not going to analyze these charts in amazing detail right now, but my guess would be that something or someone is being a little too hard on them. That would be my first takeaway message on something like this. And again, it's another whole subject to kind of look at that in more detail, but either we as a caregiving community, they, in terms of how they are judging themselves, social media, our culture, whatever it is, even though they are behaving better, they are more distressed. That's a fact. So something to keep in mind. Okay. Perfect. Any questions about any of that before I move on? Feel free at any point just to unmute yourself or put your hand up, but I'm going to keep moving if not.
I just have a question.
Sure.
Quickly. I'm just wondering if those rates are going up in other age categories as well.
Which anyone's in terms of suicide?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, they are. Yeah. I don't have the stats for exactly the incline, but yeah, I'd say the distress is across the board. Yeah. And if we could break it down more specifically in age, but you typically see like the greatest incidence in the 25 to 45 kind of age range in that category. And it's been increasing too, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about emotion and communication just for a second. I would love to know what you guys think. So just to take yourself off mute if you have anything to throw in on this. What do you think is the purpose of our emotions in the first place? What do we have them for? They're tricky. Anybody have any thoughts? Why do we have emotion? It's such a silly question. Hey?
To help us process events in our lives.
Yes, that's a really good answer, Pauline. Actually, yeah, we definitely need to help us process. Anybody else have any thoughts on what's the point of emotions in the first place? They definitely help us process.
I'd like to think it's just part of us, as it's our humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Like, try turning them off. They're kind of pre-wired.
They're
right?
communicating. It's a way to communicate through
Yes.
facial expressions and body language, and all that is another form of communication.
Totally. And actually, that is the gold star answer. It's to communicate. Emotions first serve a purpose of communicating to us directly. So in other words, we feel our own emotion first, and that communicates something to us. And then that emotion is put out there for the rest of the world to see or not see, depending on what you do with it. And it communicates often very loud and clear. When you look at some of these faces, you can make some guesses on what's going on there, right? So the purpose of emotion in the first place primarily is to communicate. And of course, there's exceptions to these too. But then when you think about what's the purpose of communication, Like, and again, that sounds like a pretty simple answer, but give it a little bit of thought for a second. And I'm going to actually just jump in and share it with you because it's a little bit self-explanatory, but I don't want to be condescending about it. But it's basically to impact behavior. That's kind of what we're aiming for. Usually when you're communicating something, it's one of four things going on. You either want someone to stop doing something or do it less, or you want them to start doing something or do it more. Tends to be one of those four things. Otherwise, I mean, sometimes we communicate for our own purposes, but even that is usually about trying to create some sort of a shift of some kind. And then what gets in the way of us having an effective impact on other people's behavior? What gets in the way of it?
Our own emotions.
Our own emotions. Exactly. Yeah. So you can see that there's this vicious sort of circling thing that happens, right? The purpose of our emotions is to communicate. Why do we communicate? To try to affect a change in behavior. And then what gets in the way? Our emotions. So depending on where your spiral's at and which way you're going, can be a little tricky. No wonder this stuff isn't easy, right? All right. The emotion tree. I know, Leah, this was one of the things that I think you were asking about. This is the first slide that kind of popped into my mind with the question that you had earlier about like, just like what might I be missing? I refer to this all the time. So when you think about emotions, we tend to have, you know, those primary ones and secondary ones. So you see the ones that are right out in the open, the ones at the top of this tree, you know, being overprotective or permissive or accommodating, defensive, rejecting, like, and in our kids, we see the same thing: blaming, critical, avoidant, denial. These are the things that you can see kind of front and center, but often there's something kind of pushing it from under the surface. And we don't always know what that is. It's not as obvious. And this is true for our kids just as much as it's true for us. So when you think about something like anger, for example, as a possible emotion that's around that tree, what might be driving that? And if you're wondering about your own anger, think about, if you can try to think a little bit about what pushes that. That was one of the questions, is like, what do I do with my own anger when all this is going on? Like, what's really behind that? Usually with anger, there's like fear on the underside of it. And it's interesting, like often under sadness is anger. And then what's behind that? Often fear. So depending on what's going on, and it's really, really important to know that the degree of your emotional expression or the amount that you feel it is amplified by things like stress, burnout, how tired you are. For our kids, how hungry they are, depending on their age and what's going on and the level of stuff coming at them, right? So this can really be amplified by other things. Like, I know when I had toddlers, there was this constant, like when there was crying and I couldn't figure it out, do they need to be changed? Are they hungry? How'd they sleep? You know, like we do that when they're infants. We don't do it when they're teenagers. Interesting that we don't, right? But it's there just as strongly. So now that we know a little bit about emotions and communication and how this kind of spiraling loop can sort of happen, now what do we do about it? An analogy that I really, really love is looking at an elevator in a giant building like this and imagining that when you think about like a big hotel or a great big building, they often have these like conference rooms and boardrooms on the ground floors. Like you often see those. So when you think about trying to get work done, you want to do them in the boardroom. You want to be on that ground floor and do whatever work you can possibly do where everybody's heads are level and they're all there to get work done. If you have a kid or a spouse or a student that's on the top floor with wherever they're at with their emotions, and you're down in the boardroom with all your logic and support and your well thought out ideas about what's going to make things better, and they're up on the top floor, it doesn't matter how loud you yell it or nicely you whisper it, they're not going to hear you. They're too far away. They're just not there. And in fact, we actually know in terms of physiology and science, the prefrontal cortex, the front part of our brain here, which is the part that does logic, consequences, abstract thinking, those kinds of things that can kind of put A plus B equals C. This is what's likely to happen. That prefrontal cortex is actually not developed fully for girls until their late teens and for boys till their early 20s. For my partner till he was like 48. So So depending on, like where this lands, you gotta be both of you on the ground floor to have these kind of conversations. You both got to come back to the boardroom. So, and if you're also on like, floor 20 or floor 12 or wherever, it's not happening. So timing is a really important piece of this. You want to invite them down to the boardroom before any of this stuff is going to work. All right. Did I miss anything? Okay, so when do we use emotion coaching? So there's a bunch of times that this is good. Actually, it's you can use it when emotions are super intense and like they're way up here and you just need them to come down. You can use it when you've got competing agendas. One of you wants one thing, the other wants the other. You both have really good reasons for wanting those. You need a little flexibility. I don't know about you, but I can't do that with my body. So when you need a little bit of it, maybe not quite that much, this is a good skill for that. Silence is dominating. Emotion coaching is really good for silence. It's actually one of the hardest things to work with, but it works. And it's pretty powerful actually. And when you're just really needing connection, when that's just kind of been missing and you need some, or they need some. So one of the things about emotion coaching and communication strategies in general, but this one in particular, is it's not designed to fix the problem. That's not likely what we're aiming for here. What we're aiming for is creating a space where the problem can get fixed. So this isn't the end all be all. This is just going to hopefully bring everybody to that ground floor where solutions become a little bit more clear and obvious. So think about it that way when you're trying to think about how you want to use this, right? When you're just like, and if you've had a student in your class or your own child or a friend that is just so elevated and worked up, you know you can't reach them, right? So this is one of the tools that we can use to bring it down. Okay, so let's get into it. Emotion coaching. How am I doing for time? Oh my God, it's already 7:30. Okay, so step one with emotion coaching is a self check-in. Step two is validating. And step three is supporting the emotional need and or supporting the practical need. You don't have to write this stuff down. I'm going to break it down in a lot more detail for you. So, but before I do that, I got one more quick poll here. I'm just wondering, oh, wait a minute. Just going to do I wanted just to do a quick check-in to see where you guys are at in terms of emotion coaching. Like if it's something that you've heard of before. Maybe, can I just get like now I can see you all now for a second because I stopped the sharing. Just a quick show of hands. Like, has anybody ever heard of emotion coaching before? Anybody? Allison, yeah. Christy, yeah. No. Okay. Andrea. All right. So we got a few that have heard about it. Okay, that's awesome. I just was wondering where we were at as far as kind of that general. All right. Should be back to seeing the steps. All right, let's move into it then and get into some more detail. So step one. With checking in with yourself, this is a little bit tricky. It's like, what do you want them to do more of or start doing, and what do you want them to do less of or stop doing altogether? So just really kind of asking yourself what you're looking for. Taking a breath. I'm going to come back to this in a second. Seriously, just take a breath whenever you can. And willing hands, like I'll come back to that too. And like just seeing where you're at, like what floor are you at on that, in that elevator? Are you way up there? Because if you are, maybe it's some time is what's needed before you start this, right? If you're too elevated, you got to bring yourself down too. The other thing I'd love to pay attention to is how uncomfortable does this feel? If it feels uncomfortable, as you start to kind of move towards it and you feel that emotional intensity is pretty high in them and maybe in you, that discomfort is a really brilliant cue that you want to lean in, not out. This is a really important factor. We're going to come back to it a couple times. Unfortunately, when you might think, oh my gosh, this is a situation where emotion coaching might be really helpful, there's hardly any time to check in with yourself. Like it might already be going crazy. So how do you find the time to do that, right? So when you don't have the time to do this, like checking in with myself and trying to be okay, if you don't have time for that, then what I want you to do is just, let's try this first, actually, before I even go into the next thing. So if everybody could, you don't have to have screens on, screens off, doesn't matter. Just for 1 second, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and put the palms of your hands facing up with your backs of your hands resting on your legs. Close your eyes, just going to get you to sit like that, palms facing up, hands resting on your thighs with your eyes closed for about 10 seconds. Just pay attention to what you do with your body. All right. Anybody have anything that they can share or that they noticed when they have their hands like that?
I stopped breathing.
What's that, Christy?
I stopped breathing.
Stop breathing. Okay. It's supposed to do the opposite. Anybody else?
I
Yeah.
start breathing.
Yeah, I started
deep
taking
breaths.
really deep breaths.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Michelle. Anybody else?
I did the same.
Deep breaths?
Deep breaths, slow deep breaths.
Yeah,
Yeah.
slow deep breaths. Okay, Christy, you and I got to talk later about that.
My hands became a lot softer.
They became a lot, what? Sorry, softer?
Yeah, like, just listening and you're tense, trying to focus, and you just kind of like your hands kind of melted.
Nice. Okay, that sounds like muscle relaxation, actually. That's awesome. So willing hands is a tool that I teach to both kids and adults. You can do it so quick, anywhere. It's so fast. And it has this natural ability. I would love to get into the science of why there is some science behind it. I'm not going to do that today, but it actually will typically, unless maybe it's like 10:30 in Ontario, typically it will help you take very slow, deep breaths. And even though throughout my career, when people talk to me about breathing, I'm probably the first one to roll her eyes and be like, oh my God, I don't want to hear anybody else tell me to take a breath. I'm telling you, it works. Taking slow, deep breaths sends a message to your nervous system that the threat that your nervous system is perceiving, like an intense emotional situation, is not life-threatening. It's taking it, you can't breathe slowly and deeply when a life-threatening situation is there, but your nervous system doesn't know the difference unless you send it a message, and you can't do it with your brain, just like talking yourself out of it. You have to send it a physiological message, which is done by oxygen inhalation. So it might sound a little crazy, but it works. And if you aren't somebody that's like, oh yes, I need to take a deep breath, try willing hands. Just get them on your thighs, palms up, give yourself 15 seconds and see what happens. That's a really great place to start. So that's step one in emotion coaching, is really taking the time to do that sort of self-assessment if you can. So the time that you might have time to do this is, your kid comes home, throws their bag down on the ground, stomps up the stairs and slams the door. And you're like, holy shit, what was that? Right? I don't even know what just happened there. That's a really good, you've just had a big hint that something big has maybe happened. And that's a really good time to take this second to do it. The times that you don't have time for that is sometimes anger comes at you so fast, you didn't see it coming and it's right in front of you. You might not have time. But whenever possible, this is a really important first step. Anybody have any questions? I see something in the chat. I'm just going to take a quick look. Oh, I got a yes from Kathy. Thanks, Kathy. Okay. Any questions so far with where we're at with any of that? With step one. All right. Step two, validate. This is what we're going to spend the most time on. This is what we typically breeze over. So answer for me, what is I'll use sad as an example for this. So the 3-letter word that comes to you when I say the sentence, it makes sense that you feel sad. Anybody? What's the 3-letter word that comes but? Yeah, thank you. But it makes sense that you might feel sad, but things are going to get better, or but it's going to be okay, or, but that wasn't as bad as it looked like, or anything like that. So yeah, but is our favorite 3-letter word. If we were just doing straight communication workshop today, I would challenge you to pay attention to how often but works its way into your communication, because it's a killer. The word but cancels out everything you said before, right? So so watch out for it. We're not a fan of buts. Okay. So with that in mind, we're going to replace that. So just for 1 second, I really just want to drive this home. It's super, super important. So again, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes just for a second. You don't have to do anything with your hands. Just close your eyes and listen to me for a second and just see how this lands. It makes sense that you feel sad, but it makes sense that you feel sad because. I'm going to say it one more time. It makes sense that you feel sad, but, and it makes sense that you feel sad because. So did you notice how different that feel? Did anybody think they were the same? Any feedback on that? Like, I'm curious if it's like, did you notice a difference on that?
Big difference.
Yeah, I can see a
Because
lot.
it's so much more validating.
Yeah,
It
right.
makes you
One's
feel
very
like you
dismissive.
shouldn't have felt what you're feeling, but because makes it okay that you felt what you felt.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Somebody else have something to add to that?
The but is very dismissive to somebody's feelings and whatever it is they're going through.
Yeah.
But because also validates, it's somewhat heading to validating
Yeah, absolutely.
and open to understanding.
Yeah, it's intended to convey all of those things. And you know what's really interesting for me, full disclosure on this, like I know this stuff, I breathe it all the time and I still use buts. This still happens in my world, you know, like, so what really happens is like you see somebody you care about suffering or struggling or angry or like really intense in their level of emotion. And you see it and you're like, okay, I can handle that, but you don't want to stay there for very long. It's nobody likes it. It's uncomfortable. We're like, okay, I'll be there for a second. Then let's get out of there really fast. So that's what the but does, right? It's like, okay, I get it. I see you. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Now let's move on to something else. Right. And so that's where things go wrong with emotion coaching, with communicating, with managing intense emotions in general, is we rush through validation and we don't take the time to really do it in a meaningful, powerful way. Typically, when I really break it down with families, that's usually what's missing. So you really need to be real and be genuine. And this is really difficult. It sounds simple, but it's not, because in order to really do this for real, you actually have to step in to the horror and the awful and the discomfort and the pain. You actually have to be there with them and feel it yourself and either connect to it with something that you feel, and not try to talk them out of it and not try to rush them through it. And that is a really, really difficult thing to do when it's somebody that you love. And I'll give you an example. Let's say my daughter comes home, you know, true story, from back around grade 5. And she says, I hate school. I'm so stupid and I've got no friends. And I don't know if you've met my kids, but they're like super cool. You might think yours are cool, but you haven't met mine yet. So like, they're like crazy, crazy cool. So my very first thing is like, that's insane. I happen to know you're smart. I happen to know you're amazing. And I know you've got tons of friends. So what are you talking about? Right. So there's no way I'm going to step into that with them because I completely disagree. Right. So it's really, really difficult to spend any time there because it doesn't feel real to me. So the challenge is to do it anyway, is to still step in anyway and feel it because it's real for them in that moment. And remember, emotions are there to communicate something. That's the purpose. So they are trying to communicate something with us, with themselves, and it's real. Emotions are valid and they're there for a reason. And if I try to talk them out of it, so if I said to my daughter, that's crazy, you're amazing, you know, and I saw you on the playground just yesterday with all these great friends, like, oh my gosh, I'm like, no, you're doing just fine. And I saw your report card, by the way, and it's fine too. So like, you know, so completely invalidating. She stomps away and there's no connection, right? Because all I've done is basically put my agenda of what I know to be real and true onto where her experience is in that moment. So to really like pull this one home, I'm going to, some of you may have seen this before, but I'm going to share a quick video with you from Brene Brown. It's my favorite. And I'm sure some of you have seen it, but at the risk of those who haven't seen it, not seeing it tonight, I really want to do it. So how do I get that? Hang on. There. Okay, so I'm hoping you can see this and hear it. Can you hear that? You hear it? Michelle, give me a nod. Can you hear it? Okay, thank you. One sec. So share. Let's try that again.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. Love that one. Okay, so I love the antelope eye roll when they do that. That's so funny. So that just, I think that one really drives home that kind of message for me around this concept of, it's, you have to actually lean in and be willing to spend some time where it's uncomfortable. And even if that emotion doesn't make sense to you and you don't feel the same, it doesn't matter. Validation is not the same as agreement. It's just being able to say, like, it makes sense to me that you feel the way you do right now. And I'm not trying to talk you out of it to feel any different. All right. So if you try to move into, like, for example here, like, you might be right. You might have something to say. Maybe you just witnessed the way your spouse, your student, your loved one, child, whoever has seen something, and they're like, they said this to me, and they're really upset about it. You're like, you were right there, and it didn't really quite go down that way, and you're right about that. It doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter if you have something really supportive and beautiful and helpful to say. If you haven't validated, it will not land. And if it's a teaching moment, this is a tough one for me as a parent. Once in a while, I'm like, I just really want to teach this to them. I really want them to know this, right? And it's so important. It means so much to me. And if I haven't spent the time in step 2 in validation, might as well not bother, right? Keep in mind that all of these things, I might be right. I might have something helpful or logical to say, and I might be looking at a teaching moment that I really don't want to miss. All of those things are about me. So if you really are doing validation, you're doing it for them, and it's about them, and you have to stay there. And you'll be able to tell when it's time to move on to step 3, because their elevator starts to come down. You'll see it, and you can feel it if you're paying attention. So before you move on to step 3, you got to watch for that. And so I'm going to give a bit of an example here. When we're doing the way you can bring that elevator down, there's a specific script that goes along with emotion coaching, and people way smarter than me say you need to give 3 becauses. It makes sense that you feel sad because. The first because, I actually copied these out of like little pieces in an elevator. So you're on the 12th floor to start. You're like way up high. The first one is because and so let's use that example of the one I did in the prequel with little Johnny. He's in, I think most of you saw that. He's in the cold. He's dug in under the playground. He is not moving for anything. He's like, I'm not coming inside. And I'm like, all right. So my first because, so you're not coming inside, Johnny. I totally hear that. And I think maybe you don't want to come inside because you love recess. I totally remember you telling me that you love recess. Next because I think actually, if memory serves me correctly, didn't you tell me that you hate circle time? Oh, and because there was this one time where you really had something important you wanted to say in circle time, and you put your hand up and you were really nice about it, and nobody called on you. So I don't know if you could hear it in that example, but the first because is matching his intensity, not his anger, but his intention, his intensity. The second because is a bit more neutral, and the third because is way more calm. So when you do your 3 becauses, you can imagine that there's the elevator, right? It's like, because. And the same is true if the emotion that you're dealing with is intense sadness or silence or withdraw, then it's the opposite. So as an example, a client that I had not just recently, actually, that's been through several foster homes, several counselors, has been dragged in there by the most recent foster care provider because she needs counseling. And she's like, and truly, she's had a horribly traumatic upbringing. She's 15 years old, and she comes in and sits there quiet as a mouse, doesn't want to say anything. So my first because is like, okay, Tiffany, it looks like you don't really want to be here. And I can imagine maybe you're feeling like a little lost right now, or a little sad, or I'm not really sure. We don't know each other very well yet, but I'm thinking because maybe somebody told you needed to be here, that you feel like you don't really want to talk. And maybe because you've had a lot of people leave you kind of stranded before. Maybe you've gone into relationships like this with other counselors and it hasn't worked out. And maybe another reason you might not want to be here is you think you've got some of your own answers and nobody's listening. So those becauses started low and kind of worked up because I'm actually trying to get a bit more energy. I'm trying to get a little bit more engagement. So you always want to meet them with your first because right where they're at. That doesn't mean you return the anger. You return the intensity. So right now, I want everybody to take their phones or their computers off mute. And then we're going to try a statement together 2 different ways. And I want to see what this feels like. So everybody come off mute. I can't quite see everybody on my screen, but everybody come off mute for a second. I'm actually going to stop sharing so I can see you. Okay. Everybody off mute. So repeat after me. Try to match this intensity, even if it feels a bit weird and people in your house are going to wonder what you're doing. I still want you to do it. Let me think. Okay. I said, I don't want to talk about it.
I said I don't want to talk
Said
about
I
it.
don't want to talk about it.
And I don't want to talk about it.
Okay, good. Okay, let's do it
I'm
one more
supposed to
time.
do that, Emily.
I said I don't want to talk about it.
I said I don't want to
don't
talk
wanna
about it.
About
Don't
it.
want to
Okay, that
talk
was
about it.
better. Okay, one more. I said I don't want to talk about it.
I said I don't want to talk about it.
Want to talk about it.
All right. Okay, now we're gonna try a different one. Try to match.
Okay.
Yeah, now you can tell all the kids it's okay. Everybody can go sit down. Let's try this one. A little different. I said I don't want to talk about it.
I said I don't want to.
I don't want to talk about it.
Okay, one more time. I said I don't want to talk.
I said
I said I don't want to talk about it.
Okay. Really good. Thank you. Okay, you can put yourselves back on mute if you want. I know that's really weird for a lot of people. So what I want you to pay attention to is which one felt more comfortable. If you're the kind of person that's like does all right with anger and intensity when it's kind of up, when the intensity is more outward like that, then that first one might have been a little bit more comfortable. If you're somebody that's more like that kind of stuff, that louder in your face stuff, not comfortable, then the second one was probably more comfortable. So knowing yourself well enough to know where your own space is, where your own comfort zone is a really important piece of understanding how to use this tool, right? Because if you're somebody that shies away from some of that stuff when that intensity is really high, this stuff is going to be really, really hard when those loud intensities come at you. And the same is true for when someone's really withdrawing and really sad. And we can be afraid, like, I don't want to say the wrong thing, so I just won't say anything at all, right? They're already really hurting. I don't want to make it worse. So I just wanted to, that's a fun little exercise, I think, to kind of help tune in to where your defaults are and what's most comfortable for you. Okay, so moving on. Step 3. Oh, before we get there, this is really, I love this visual. This stuff is scary. So that's the reason for this haunted, weird looking house. Anticipate fear and discomfort. You got to lean into it. When those things happen, just know it's going to come. And you can't get away from it. And see the light on in the thing, like that's your person that you love. And they're suffering, right? So leaning in, knowing it's coming, and that's what it's going to feel like, super, super important. And don't be afraid, even though it's scary. Step 3, big deep breath. This is what we're all good at. So once you see that elevator come down and you've got it close to that ground floor, this is where you can actually meet the emotional need. Sadness, so I've just kind of captured a few of them here. Now that you're both in the boardroom, sadness is usually craving comfort. I need a hug. Can we make a cup of tea? You know, do you want to watch a movie together? Anger craves feeling heard, creating space, or setting boundaries, or maybe even all of them. So when it's anger, it's like, did I miss anything? Is there anything else you can tell me? Like, what else is going on? Like, or do they need to set some boundaries? Shame, if there is embarrassment and shame, that craves reassurance. It's going to be okay. I'm going to be here with you. You're not going to do this alone. And anxiety, that craves supportive exposure. So that might look something like, I know this is scary. Let's start with something small and we'll do it together. Right? So anxiety wants to talk you into avoiding. Supportive exposure is like, if we keep avoiding this, anxiety is only going to get bigger. So let's start small and let's do it together. And then meeting the practical need. Often this isn't even necessary. By the time you get here, you're going to feel like you're in a good spot. You might not even need this, but if you do, there can be practical needs. So for example, setting limits. That little Johnny example that I gave you is like, so after we did the 3 becauses, and he's looking at me with his big cold eyes, and I did a redirect. With the younger kids, redirect and distraction works really, really well. Sometimes it does with youth as well. But youth tend to crave a little bit more problem solving typically. So the redirect with Johnny was like, you know, I'm here to show you some cool stuff, but I'm so cold out here. Like, do you want to come inside with me so I can show you? All of a sudden he's like, oh, what do you got? That's cool. And he comes in. Sometimes you need to take over. This is especially true with situations where there's victimization or bullying going on. So I think that that's a really important distinction to make. If you've got a kid that's being victimized or bullied and they say, I don't want you to help me with this, that's a miscue. That's the one exception where what they really are saying in that case is, I'm dying for some help, but I'm so scared it's going to get worse. Right? So this needs to be treated really, really carefully, but it's not the time for redirect. And when it comes to bullying or victimizing, that's when we really need to kind of step into a bit of a leadership role on that one, and maybe take over and get some other people involved if it's needed, right? And then the final part of meeting a practical need might be, again, supportive exposure, depending on what's going on. So that can be either an emotional need or a practical need. It can be either. So that can look as simple as, like, let's go back to that example of I hate school, I'm stupid, and I have no friends. I'll leave all the extra intensity stuff out of it. And so I'm like, so if I was really trying to validate that, I would be like, okay, actually, I can see you're super upset about this. And that kind of makes sense to me, because now that I think of it, I remember you saying that you had a huge fight with Kiara the other day, and maybe things are not better yet. And I didn't know that. And actually, I also remember that you got a math test back just recently, and you didn't do as well as you were hoping to do on it. And the other day when I picked you up from school, I saw that you were standing by yourself. Like, maybe things have changed with your friends that I don't know about. So am I missing anything? And, and it's like, so I'm not talking her out of it. I'm like, okay, it makes sense you might feel this way. And then, do you want to like, how can I help you? What do you need? Can I give you a hug? Can you, is there anything else you want to tell me about? So it's really just like, once we're both there together, it's like, how about we try to sort this out together? Or it might be, I might hear, no, actually, I don't want your help at all right now. And that's okay. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of space. Is it okay if I check back in 10 minutes and see how you're doing? So depending on where things are at with that. So just having that permission to be like, maybe not right now, but you see them coming down, but they're not quite all the way there. Or maybe they're down and they're like, that was an intense ride. I need a minute. Right. So you give them that time. When you get to this place, one thing I really want to assure people of is trusting this process is a really important piece, because I can't tell you how many times I've had kids where I work with the kids and I work with the parents, and I can't share what each other are saying because of confidentiality. But I've taught emotion coaching to the parents, and they've been trying and trying and trying, and they come in and they're like, it's not working, Siri. I've tried it 10 times. It's not working. And meanwhile, the kid is saying, I don't know what's going on with my parents, but like, they're all of a sudden really amazing. Like they all of a sudden are getting it. Like, I don't know what's happening. And so, and isn't that kind of interesting, right? And I can't say like, parents, yeah, you're almost there, because the kid still looks the same, right? So remember, like, these habits that we have of how we relate to each other are deeply ingrained habits. And if you've ever tried to break a habit, it's not easy. So we go back to this default place time after time after time. It is really, really hard to shake that. And even when the shift starts to happen on the inside, the behavior might still look the same on the outside. So, and if I had a dime for every time that happened, where the parent is like, it's not working, and the kid's like, something's working. And parents actually normally don't even know. So keeping that in mind, I think is pretty important. Did I forget anything? No. Okay, barriers. Pay attention to this one. I'm curious, which one is your barrier? What would be one that, that really hit you? So for example, barriers can include a bunch of different things. So the most popular one that I find is that we tend to breeze over validation and go straight to support. That's where we all want to fix it, right? Like, we don't want to see our kids suffering. We don't want to see them in pain. We want to fix this as fast as possible. So we want to move into problem solving or supporting as quick as we can. That's one area that we can accidentally, this may not work because we didn't hang out in validation long enough. The other thing is, like, we are really drawn to validate things that we feel are true. So for example, like I had a kid just recently, I didn't even know this was a thing. Like maybe you guys know this is a thing. Cow tipping. I was talking to Michelle about this just the other day. Cow tipping, when I was a kid, was tipping a cow over for real in a field. Now you can actually go up to a kid in high school, and this kid that I was talking to, he's like 6'4". He's a super tall guy, grade 11 or 12, I forget, but he's a big guy. And they were coming up to him and setting him up by like putting their knee out, and then one would come up from the like behind him, and one would come up from the front and push him over so he wipes out. And I can feel the fury even just talking about it rising up in me. It makes me so angry, right? So that was a very easy thing to validate. Another example, I've got a kid that comes in who's been sexually abused. And she is talking about all the things that she did wrong that caused the sexual abuse. It's all about what she was wearing. She shouldn't have accepted the gift. She should have known better than to take the ride with him. She should have stayed with her friends like she was told, all of these things. You can imagine what I want to do is be like, no, 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 it is never your fault. That is not your fault. So validating that for me, really hard, right? So see the difference in those two situations, but they equally need validation to be able to move to a place where we can start trying to figure out what to do next. And one doesn't deserve the validation more than the other, just because for me, one is easier. So we want to rescue, we want to teach. That's another piece. Like we just want to, like, especially when it's this, we love them so much, or we just like, we really want to fix this, or we're so uncomfortable with how this has been feeling. We want it quick. This is a really big one. And this happens a lot around when kids are sad. You don't want to make it worse. You're afraid to plant the wrong idea. I've had a lot of parents say, like, I'm not going to ask them about suicide. I can't ask them about suicide because what if they weren't thinking about it and now I've planted the seed to make, for suicide. So I don't want to bring it up. And I'm here to tell you that you will not plant an idea. If it is not already in there, you're not going to plant it. If it is already in there, it's going to feel so good that you're talking about it out loud, right? So you're not going to make it worse. Err on the side of you can't mess that one up, right? So, and whatever is in there for them is already there. So talking about it out loud isn't going to make it any worse, or hopefully it will make it better. But it might look like sometimes you'll see, this is why it's hard, right? Sometimes you'll see that emotion elevate. You finally name it, like that guy, the big 6'4" guy. When I did this process with him, he broke down sobbing in my office, just sobbing. That's hard to see, but he said, like, I've never had anybody understand it before. I never had anybody really get it. So even though those tears were really sad, it was also kind of a cue that we were getting somewhere. The hardest thing to validate is self-blame, like that sexual abuse scenario I offered. That's a really tough one to validate. Hopelessness, like, I've been trying to fix this problem. I've felt sad most of my life, as far back as I can remember. This has been bothering me. I've tried everything. I'm still not getting there. Why isn't anything working? Validating hopelessness is really tough because you're tempted to say, like, don't give up, keep trying, it's going to be okay. Instead of saying, you know what, that makes sense that you feel pretty hopeless right now. I know you've been trying really hard and you're not getting the results that you were hoping for. In fact, I think somebody told you you were going to be better by now, and I know you don't feel like you are. And that sucks. When you have anger directed at you, depending on who you are and what makes up who you are, that can be a really tricky one too, because sometimes other people's anger, especially when it's directed at us, triggers our own anger. So how do you deal with that, right? And you often don't have time to do that check-in and take those deep breaths, right? So wherever you can, just if you know that about yourself, you're already winning. And when you can, taking those deep breaths and think about that emotion tree, like ask yourself that just even on your own, like, is my anger really truly, is it anger, or am I afraid of something? Is there something I'm worried about underneath that? Am I worried I'm not going to do a good job with this? Am I nervous that if I get walked on, that that it's never going to stop, or whatever it might be for you? It's worth a conversation with yourself or a close friend or somebody that you trust, that you think that you can kind of understand that and unpack it a little bit. It's worth taking a look at it. And shutting down in silence, that's a really tough thing to validate too. That can be really, really hard. Because you're just not getting a lot. But when we do emotion focused family therapy training, they actually have you validate silence for quite a while. Like, I can guess that you might feel this way because of this. And even though you're not saying anything, I'm thinking maybe this might be true for you. They call it whack-a-mole. Like, you're just like trying to guess, and like knowing your kid as well as you know him, you're just like, you can probably make some pretty educated guesses. I'm wondering how I'm doing for time. This is over time. So this, I'll send this video to you instead of taking the time to do it right now. It's about a 3 or 4 minute video, and it's called Not About the Nail. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it before. It's a riot, but it's basically, yeah, it's so good. So I'll put it in the follow-up email I'm going to send you with a script of exactly, like, more specifically on emotion coaching. And you can check it out there, but it's essentially, it's like this guy that's like, I can see the problem. She's got a nail sticking right out of her forehead. And he's like, I can see the problem. We just need to get the nail out. And she's like, it's not about the nail. And she's going, you know, so he finally has to, like, anyway, I'll send it to you. It's a good one. So this is one of my favorite quotes from Mental Health Foundations. It is not what happens, it's what happens next. So it's a really important thing to think about, and it keeps me really grounded in this communication style. It's not about what's happened, whether it's right, wrong, it really doesn't matter. It's about what I do next. All right, wrapping up. So some feedback and questions. I want to do a quick poll with you because I want to see where we're at for what you retained with some of what we've covered there. So if anybody absolutely has to go, I've gone over time by about 10 minutes here. So if you have to run, that's no problem. If you can stick it out with me for another 5, then that would be amazing. But totally your call. So I've got 3 questions here that if you could take a second to answer for me, that would be awesome. This will give me an idea of what stuck. All right, we're almost done. If you finished with that poll, I think we'll wrap that up. I didn't get all answers there, but that's cool. I'll share the results. So you guys did great. So the, yeah, check in with yourself, validate, and support. This is a bit of a trick question here because check in with yourself, support the emotional need, support the practical need. We did talk about that. The important thing that this one is missing is validate. It doesn't have it in there. And if you miss that, might as well not bother. And then I'm super excited to see everybody kind of looking at, yeah, this, like, how it's a real popular one. This, like, I can't stand to see their suffering. It's too painful. I need to fix it. I can relate to that. It's a really, really hard one. And that's why this is so difficult. But thank you so much for answering that stuff. That's really, it's good for me. And then finally, if you could put in the chat what your one nugget was that you're going to take away from this, if you can think of any. One nugget that you'll take away, and one thing that seemed confusing, or one thing, one muddy point, one thing that felt like I wish I'd spent a bit more time on that one. If we were going to go back and do another workshop, that's what I'd like to do. Nice. Okay, excellent. And then,
Oh, sorry, I was trying to find a chat.
did you find it?
Yeah, I found it now.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, the hard part coming up with 3 because is in the moment. Totally. Oops. Most confusing. Leaving the but out. I know that's a tough one. It makes sense because, yeah, need to validate. Nice. Okay. Feel free to continue to scribble some stuff in there in the chat. I'm going to go back and revisit that. Does anyone have any questions? Anything that they feel like they'd, I'm not, even though we're kind of wrapping up our time here, anything that we didn't touch on that you want to throw out as a question before we wrap up?
I had one. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. One was I wrote it down. It was about, you said when the confidentiality between like the child and the parents, you can't go back and forth to say what's what.
Mhm.
You said, I was going to say, is there any signals that parents can recognize in kids when things are actually working that you can't actually like tell them about, or that maybe they're missing or something?
Yeah, that's a super good question, Leah. So you will get a sense sometimes of that elevator coming down, like you can see it. But I saw this really cool cartoon one time. It's the snapshot, and it's the kids in the door. They've just gone into their bedroom and slammed the door, and the parents are outside the door trying to talk to them and saying like, I understand you might feel because, and the kids like pacing around the room, and they're not opening the door, and the parents are looking at each other, and it's an emotion focused family therapy, little caricature type thing, right? And so they're looking at each other going like, it's not working, and so they try again. Well, and you might also be thinking this because, and the kids coming closer to the door on the other side, but they can't see it because the door's still closed, and they try again, and the kid's got its hand on the doorknob ready to open the door after they try again. And then the parents are like, it's not working. Well, we'll leave you for now, but I'm going to come back and check in later. And the kid's on the other side of the door with like a little half smile, like maybe it's okay to talk to them, but they didn't know. So it's a good point, Leah. Like sometimes you won't see it, and you should do it anyway, because erring on the side of doing it anyway is so much better than not, even if you don't see it. So you won't always, because they are used to behaving and appearing a certain way, and they're likely going to try to stick with that. That's what feels safe. They developed those patterns and behaviors and habits for a reason. So they're likely to hold on to those. And it's going to take a lot of repetition and practice to come out of that to make a new default behavior. Right. So it takes way longer than most parents wish that it would, but it does work. But the good news is that the shift usually happens in the kid way faster than we think. And it's already starting to unfold. We don't always see it. But if you're paying attention, you can, and scaling questions can really help too. Like on where are you at? Like if your anger out of 10 was way up here, and that's where you were when you first started talking about this, where are you at right now? And just asking them, and they might tell you. They might not, but they might.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
I just had one. In advocating for our own kids and having some understanding around the emotional coaching, is there a way to, I guess, help support, advocate for your kids? I just feel like sometimes when I discuss these things, I look like I have two heads.
So, okay, can you give me an example?
Like maybe I would say, like my child was so upset at the time. He was sort of in fight or flight. So he's not in a place to hear the corrections that were being made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like the prefrontal cortex was not coming online. It was offline.
Yeah.
And they look at you like, I don't know, like you have two
Okay,
heads.
yeah, that's a good example. So, so I've actually used this before with clients, with kids, with my own kids, like where like, so you don't move into corrections until they're on the ground floor.
Right, the connect and correct. I understand that, but I think trying to advocate that for people working with my kids, is there a route?
Yeah, no, well, you can, all you can share with people who work with your kids is like, this is what works for us at home.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is what we do that, and this
Okay.
is what works. And
Yeah.
if you find this technique works, there's training available for it,
Yeah.
right? So you can
Yeah.
share that with other caregivers,
Okay.
teachers,
Yeah.
whatever, right? So like, for sure, you can do that and advocate for it and say like, we find this successful.
Okay, yeah.
And I had one other thought that's just, I just lost it, but it might come back to me. But it's tough, right? Because often, you know, you might have found some strategies that you find effective and other people don't have time to implement them, or they don't have the training for how they work. And it can be pretty challenging to have, but if you can create, even if other people aren't able to do it in other settings and in other environments, but
Yeah.
you can create it at home, if you've
Yeah.
made that space a safe space, with connection in it, that's the foundation, right? Even if they don't get it in other places, they're going to come back and they know they have it with you, then they can take on the rest of the world, right?
Okay.
So if you've like, that's where it starts from, and then it expands from there. And what I was going to say was, sometimes when I've done my becauses and they're looking at me like two heads, because they're like, what the hell are you talking about? I've even used one of my becauses as like, you know, this might sound a bit weird because I don't know if I've ever talked about it like this before. You know, I'm not sure I've ever really used, you know, we've never really communicated this way before. I'm trying something new, and you know, I'm hoping it's going to help for both of us, you know, and that's, again, just being really genuine and transparent with it. And I know this might feel a bit weird at first. It feels weird for me too, but I hope it's going to be more helpful. And just, you know, just full disclosure, real honest. That's what's part about being genuine and honest is all about.
Yeah. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Any other
you.
questions? Yeah, no problem. So I'm going to assume we are good, but I've left my cell phone. If you call and I don't recognize the number, I'll probably screen you. So text me and say, hey, I was in your workshop, I had a couple questions. Feel free to email me as well. Anything like that that comes up, I'm more than happy to talk about it. This is one of my favorite subjects. So definitely open to ongoing communication about it if you're interested. And I'm super, super, super grateful for your time tonight. I couldn't do this without you guys, and I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you very much. And with that, I think I'll close us off. Sorry, we went a little bit overboard. I knew it was going to be tough to squeeze it all into an hour, but thanks for sticking it out with me. I appreciate it.
Thank
All right.
you. This was very helpful.
Okay, excellent. Take care. Have a good night, everyone.